Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I am Auron MacIntyre. Before we get started today, I just wanted to remind you that one of the ways we keep the lights on around here is, of course, subscriptions to Blaze TV. So if you enjoy supporting this show and you want to get all the great behind the scenes content from your favorite Blaze TV hosts, you need to head to blazetv.com/Auron and use the promo code Auron to get $20 off your subscription today. That's blazetv.com/Auron, $20 off your subscription today. All right, guys, we are continuing our series on Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince. We are now in chapter 9, and we're going to be getting into some of the most important parts of The Prince today, especially Machiavelli's focus on the need to control the means of violence. Machiavelli was very big on winning with your own swords, winning with your own power, under your own strength. How critical that is to actually controlling the nation, actually holding sovereignty. Anyone who's dependent on someone else's weapons, someone else's might, cannot, by definition, be truly sovereign. We're going to dive into all that. Before we do, let's hear about Frontier Magazine. Hey guys, we all have to read things digitally these days, but I'm old school. Whenever I can, I want to feel the weight of the page in my hand. So when I look at Frontier Magazine, which is always beautifully shot and beautifully laid out and has really interesting articles, that's what I'm looking for. I've written for Frontier. Many of my guests have written for Frontier from this show. And if you want to get access to Frontier Magazine, you need to subscribe to Blaze Unlimited. When you do, you're not just going to get issue 5, you're also going to get all the other premium perks, and you're going to get back issues 1 through 4 digitally, so you're immediately caught up. If you want to do that, you need to head to blazeunlimited.com/Auron and use the promo code Frontier40 to get $40 off your subscription. That's blazeunlimited.com/Auron, Frontier40 for that discount. All right, so when we left off, our last chapter was about rulers using wickedness. Is the wicked ruler someone who ultimately is benefiting? Are they doing something smart? Is there a correct way to go about it? He also talked about other ways that people come to power. So we're going to be moving to chapter 9, where he talks about the civil principality. We've got a lot to go through today, so let's just jump into the text. At the start of chapter 8, I spoke of 2 ways of becoming a prince that aren't entirely matters of fortune or virtue. And now I come to the second of them. A citizen becomes the prince of his country not by wickedness or any intolerable violence, but by the favor of his fellow citizens. So basically, we have kind of an elected king, and because he's still talking about monarchies. He will talk about republics in his other book, the Discourses on Livy, which I will probably go through some selections on as I expand this series. But in The Prince, he is speaking very directly to kings, to monarchs, to princes. And so he says, okay, you may come to power as a king through wickedness or violence. Another way you could come to power is through being kind of elected. This is actually a long tradition. We even see this somewhat reflected in the American tradition. Originally, Alexander Hamilton suggested that the presidency would be for life, essentially an elected monarch. So you would have to elect a new king every time one died. But once a president was elected, he would stay president for the rest of his life, effectively an elected executive that is monarchical in kind of the sense that we now understand it. So Machiavelli is saying you could come to power through the favor of your fellow citizens. We call this the civil principality. There it is. Okay, sorry, I lost my place there for a moment. We call this the civil principality. Here are 4 published. Here are the. This is what I get for reading the academic translation on air. I got lost in the paragraph there where they're giving you the different translations. Sorry. We can call this the civil principality, and then they give you 4 possible translations. So we'll just read through one. Nor is genius or fortune altogether necessary to attain it. Now, this kind of principality, this way of becoming a prince, is obtained through the support of the common people, or with the support of the nobles. Every city-state has common people who don't want to be ruled or ordered around by the nobles. and nobles who do not want to who do want to rule and order around the common people. And the conflict between these two opposite political drives results in each city in one of these three things: a civil principality, freedom, or ungoverned chaos. Whether a civil principality is created by the people or the nobles depends on which group has the opportunity. When the nobles see that they can't resist popular pressure, they select one of their number, praise him to the skies, and make him a prince, hoping to be able, under his shadow, to get what they want. So he says, okay, look, you're going to have this scenario where either you're going to have a ruler, you're going to have kind of a Republican style government, or you're just going to have ungoverned chaos. And you are only going to have kind of two people that ultimately make and elevate a king. A king could elevate himself through violence or some other method of gaining control. But you also have the opportunity for the nobles to elevate the king. They select a king of their choosing, or the people could select a king. And if the people select the king, what they're looking for is that ultimately he's going to side with them. That's what they're hoping for. So they're going to look for someone who's promising things to the populace. They're going to praise him to the skies. They're going to turn him into the prince. But ultimately, what they really want is a ruler that is going to be interested in their favor, in their advantage. When the people find that they can't resist the nobles, they select one of their number, praise him to the skies, and make him prince, hoping that his authority will be a defense for them. Someone who becomes prince with the help of the nobles will find it hard to maintain his position because he'll be surrounded by men who regard themselves as equals, which will inhibit him in giving orders and managing affairs. So if the nobles are the reason you become king, then it's going to be difficult for you to do a lot because they're going to have expectations of you. They're going to have things that they see you as one of the equals, that one of the other nobles that just got elevated into this position, not as some godly figure from on high, not some all powerful position. They could have been king if they had simply been named the noble who would be elevated. And this is important because when we think of limited government, right, one of the things we think of is that a king is just out of control. That's kind of the way we've had monarchy explained to us, that kings just have all this power. They do whatever they want. But that's not true. In fact, if the king especially has been elevated by nobles, he's actually quite constrained by other men in similar positions. The king is just one of many equals who has to ultimately gain the support. And that's why kings were so reliant, especially in the Middle Ages, on their barons, their dukes, their other nobles that they had to draw upon for support, troops, money, all these kinds of things. You couldn't just go around dictating whatever you want. Many kings wanted to do that, and later on we saw the push towards royal absolutism. This is a very interesting transition. If you've read Bertrand de Juvenel's book on power, he talks about this process, how the understanding of the king as this tyrant who has no restrictions is a radical misunderstanding, and that in fact, in many cases, it is the creation of democracy that has freed up state power. Those who have read Hans Hermann Hoppe will also recognize this from Democracy, the God That Failed. That's because he stole it from Bertrand de Juvenel. But either way, both men are right that when you erode away that aristocracy, we often think of that as some kind of, ultimately like an elite that doesn't care about us, and that can be true, and that's going to try to take power to itself, which is often the case. But we don't realize that that aristocracy did serve as a certain type of barrier to the centralization of power. By having other nobles, other people who can control the area, can make demands on the king, you actually limit his overall power. And that's what Machiavelli is saying here. If you have these nobles who elevated you to power as a king, you're going to have to answer to them. Your power will be less because you're constantly dealing with the nobles. They're going to constrain you. They're going to make demands on you. It is easier for a prince who gets there with the help of popular favor. He'll be able to exercise his principality single-handedly with few, if any, people unwilling to obey him. So Machiavelli says it's better for you as a tyrant that, or just a king in general, to be elevated by the people, because then there is no barrier between you and what you want to do. The people are not strong enough to push back against you. All they can do is elevate you. Once you're elevated, they don't have the money, they don't have the influence, they don't have, their own little private armies like many nobles do. They don't have the ability to punish you if you decide and go and do what you want. So it's better to come to power under the people than it is under the nobles. Again, something you'll see echoed in something like Bertrand de Juvenal or in Hop, because they also point out that it is this relationship between the tyrant and the people, right? The people put the tyrant in place often because they think he's going to save them from the nobles. This is the relationship. Again, a lot of people don't realize this, but if you look at many societies that had monarchies, it was the peasantry that supported the king the most. You want to look at the French Revolution? Guess who wanted to keep the monarchy? It was the peasants. It was the people out in the Vendée that ultimately wanted the monarchy to stay in place. You look at the Russian Revolution; it's the peasants that want to keep the czar. It's the kind of these other groups, the bourgeois, those in urban areas. They're the ones that want to overthrow the king, but the people see him as their champion against these other forces. So often, by investing, this power in the king, the people are hoping that he will come against the nobles that they often see as oppressing them. But Machiavelli points out that does make the king more powerful, because if he's coming to power under the people instead of under the aristocracy, he has a far freer hand in everything he can do, which is, of course, good for the king, and in some cases might be good for the people. But it does noticeably remove restraints from government. Furthermore, a prince can't satisfy the nobles without acting wrongly and harming others, because what the nobles want is to oppress the people, whereas he can satisfy the people without harming anyone, because their desires are more honorable than those of the nobles. All the people want is to not be oppressed. Also, a prince can't secure himself against a hostile people, because there are too many of them, whereas he can secure himself against the nobles because there aren't that many of them. I should add a few words explaining the context of secure himself against, i.e., what the threats are from the two directions. The worst that a prince can expect if the people turn hostile is that they will abandon him. But if the nobles turn hostile, he has to fear not only that they will abandon him, but also that they will attack him. The nobles are more likely to attack than the people are, because they look ahead further and are more intelligent than the people, and more intelligent than the people do, and will always act early so as to protect themselves from danger further down the line, and so as to obtain favors from whoever they expect to win. In one respect, though, the people are more of a threat than the nobles, namely, the prince has to live always with the same people, but he doesn't have to always have the same nobles, because he can make and unmake nobles every day, giving or taking away honors at will. So it says, look, there are ups and downs at each one of these. Like, ultimately, you want to side with the people if you can, because it's going to give you more power. You're not going to have to do what the nobles say. It's easier to take power with the people, because the nobles are going to want advantages out of the people. They're going to want you to oppress the people, to give them benefits for oppressing the people. That's all stuff they're going to want to do, and it's going to create hostility. And you have to be worried because you're always around the people, and there's a lot more of them, right? Like, it's very difficult to replace the people, but you can much more easily replace the nobles if you would like. Now, this is a little different in today's world, because our nobles have figured out how to replace the people, actually. Our nobles have decided they will just use the great replacement. They will use demographic transfers from different countries. You could keep the same nobility, but you can swap out the people. This is something Christopher Lasch talked about in his book, Revolt of the Elites. So we're seeing this dynamic shift somewhat. At the time, Machiavelli probably couldn't envision a world in which your common ruler brings in large amounts of people from some far-off nation and uses them repeatedly to displace this, or at least he probably didn't think it was going to become super common practice. But of course, it has in our world, and that's why things have changed dramatically. I'll try to set all this out more clearly. The first question that you, as a prince, ought to ask about the noble is, does he behave in a way that ties his success in everything to yours? If he does and isn't greedy, he should be honored and loved. As those who don't tie their success to yours, there are two cases to consider. One, the reason why a given noble doesn't link to his success with yours may be that he is feeble and a coward. This is a man you should make use of, especially if he has good advice to offer. In times of prosperity, he will bring you honor, and when things go badly, you don't have to fear anything from him. A noble that doesn't commit himself to you because he was ambitious plans of his own shoes that he is giving more. Sorry, I lost it there. A noble that doesn't commit himself to you because he has ambitious plans of his own shows that he is giving more thought to himself than to you. And a prince ought to keep a watchful eye on this man, fearing him as though he were an open enemy, because in difficult times, that's just what he will be. So he says, all right, look, first thing you need to do is evaluate nobles. And if they're tying themselves to you without any kind of malice, they're not greedy for anything, then that's great. You should honor them. You should elevate them. If you have the loyalty of a noble and it's kind of through thick and thin, no matter what he's getting from you, then ultimately that's a good thing and you should embrace this guy. However, if there's like two types of people that might not side with you, you've got nobles that are just weak and scared. And he says that's fine because those guys are so cowardly. They're not going to do anything. They don't really represent a threat. They were too cowardly to join you, but that also means they're probably too cowardly to ultimately leave you or betray you. So they'll probably be useful at certain times. And when things get bad, you just don't have to worry about it. However, if you do have a noble who doesn't want to because he's so ambitious about himself, because he ultimately is going to make a move on you, or he has some level of threat he's going to present to you, that's what you want to worry about. Because the minute things go south, that guy is going to come for you. He has the courage. He didn't eschew connections to you just because he was worried about what might happen. He did it because he truly has other plans. He has designs on your position. You need to watch out for that ambitious guy, because if things go sideways, he's going to take advantage as soon as possible. Someone who becomes a prince through popular favor then ought to keep the people friendly towards him. And this isn't difficult because all they ask for is that he not oppress them. But someone who becomes a prince through the favor of the nobles against the people's wishes should make it his first priority to win the people over to himself. And he can easily do this by taking them under his protection. When men are well treated by someone, the loyalty they'll have towards their benefactor will be especially great if they have expected him to treat them badly. The prince can win their affections in many ways, but I shouldn't go into those because they are too various, depending on the circumstances, to be brought under fixed rule. The bottom line is simply a prince must have the people friendly towards him, otherwise he has no security in difficult times. So again, Machiavelli, big believer in elite theory, the founder of elite theory. It's the elites that matter. It's the elites that lead. It's elite opinion that determines everything. We care about the elites. However, this is a mistake a lot of elite opinion or elite theory people make. They then just say, well, the opinion of the people means nothing. The favor of the people means nothing. It's all elites all the way down. And Machiavelli says, no. It is the elites that rule. It is the elites who make the decision. It is the elites that lead. And you should be looking towards the elites to understand power. However, if you're a king, you need the people. You need the favor of the people. You are not safe without the favor of the people. And he says there's easy ways to do this, right? Even if you're brought up by the aristocracy, by the nobles, you can still secure the favor of the people. And you should. It's relatively easy. You just need to protect them. You need to offer them things. You need to protect them against the nobles, give them as much freedom as possible. And if you have that, you're going to be in a safe position. If, however, you came to power under the nobles and you don't have the favor of the people, you're always in a precarious position and you're extremely dependent on the favor of the nobles. Not a good place to be. Nabis, prince of Spartans, successfully defended his country and his government against an attack by all of Greece and by a victorious Roman army. To overcome this peril, he had to make himself secure against a few of his subjects, but a few wouldn't have been sufficient if the people had been hostile to him. Don't challenge what I am saying here by producing the trite proverb that he who builds on the people builds on mud, for this is not unrestrictedly true. The proverb is true when a private citizen builds his power on the foundation, persuading himself that people will free him when he's oppressed by his enemies or by the magistrate. That would be prince may very well be disappointed by the outcome, as were the Gracchi in Rome and Georgius Scali in Florence. But if it's a prince who has established himself on popular favor, a prince who knows how to lead, is brave, keeps his head in a crisis, takes the right precautions, and by his own resolution and energy keeps the whole people encouraged, he won't be disappointed. It will turn out that he laid good foundations for his people. So it says, look, you have to be careful. Yes, it's true to some extent that if you build your power on the people, they could not be there for you, especially if you're this private citizen who has built the foundation on the power of the people. However, if you've been elevated to that level of prince and you are also building the favor with the people, that's going to be a firmer foundation. So he says, don't entirely rely on the people, especially if you're a private citizen elevated by them. But if you are a prince and you can secure the power and the prestige with the people, that is far better. That's going to hedge your bets against the aristocracy. That's going to make you safer. You're going to have to constantly worry about the average person wanting to assassinate you or overthrow you or rob your castle, these kind of things. Like, that's going to be a far better situation to be in. This kind of prince is most at risk when he's passing through civil to absolute government. Let us look at why this is so. The prince in question rules either personally or through a magistrate. If through a magistrate, that is a source of weakness and insecurity in his government. Again, always Machiavelli making sure you understand it's critical who has power, where it's distributed. Think about your sovereignty. Understand it. Have you handed your power out to someone else? Are they ruling in your name? Because you might not have direct control. You might be opening yourself up to a dangerous situation. If through magistrates, that is a source of weakness and insecurity in his government, because it rests entirely on the goodwill of the citizen who has been raised to the magistrate, who can, especially in troubled times, easily destroy the government through intrigue or open defiance. And at such times, the prince won't be able to exercise absolute authority because his subjects, accustomed as they are to getting orders from the magistrate, aren't going to start taking orders from him in a time of crisis. So if you've elevated this private citizen and they are the ones that are giving orders and your people are used to taking orders from someone like a magistrate, then they are probably not going to pay attention to you in times of crisis, and you're giving the magistrate the possibility of destroying your government. Also, at such a time, there will always be a scarcity of men the prince can trust. He can't rely on what he sees when things are quiet and the citizens need the government. At such times, everyone comes running, everyone promises to do what he wants, and everyone wants to die for him when there is no immediate prospect of death. But in troubled times, when the government needs the citizens, he finds that very few show up. Mightn't the prince at least try relying on the citizens' loyalty? That would be a risky experiment, made all the more dangerous by the fact that it can be tried only once. So a shrewd prince ought to handle things in such a way that his citizens will always, in all circumstances, need the government and need him. Then he will always find them loyal. So Machiavelli tells you something that you probably already know. The government needs people to need it. The ruler who wants to be secure in his power has to be needed. The minute the people don't need the government, they'll say all this stuff. They'll say, oh, we can do all these things for you. We'll die for you. We'll do all these amazing things for you. But when push comes to shove, when it's time to actually make things happen, they're nowhere to be seen. They've left. You need people who need you. They have to feel dependent on you. And this is why every ruler, whether they admit it or not, goes out of their way to make people as dependent on them as possible. You might not like this. A lot of people are going to say, oh, well, this is bad. Well, maybe it is. And as someone who doesn't want to be, under someone's control, you probably don't want to be dependent on a government or a king. In fact, if I was to offer you some advice, I would say be as independent as possible. But if you're trying to think about power, if you're trying to understand power, this is important. And the founders knew this, of course, right? They wanted people to be as not dependent as they could get. They wanted people to be as independent as they could be. That's what they knew would create a republic. Now, remember, Machiavelli's not talking about a republic. He's talking about a prince. So this is critical. Machiavelli is giving the advice he believes will most help the prince, even though Machiavelli favors republics. So he's not telling you what's moral. He's not telling you even what he would prefer. He's telling you specifically what will benefit the class of people he's giving advice to. Machiavelli is acting kind of like a lawyer here, right? Is it good? Is it bad? Do you want to defend a murderer? No, but maybe that's part of the job. And so you give advice to the defense attorney that will work for them, even if you don't agree with what they're doing. The attorney's job is to give the advice to the client that's honest, even if they don't like what that person's done, right? You still advise them as such. And that's kind of what Machiavelli's doing here. Whether you agree with having a king or not, and Machiavelli actually doesn't, you still give the advice. And the advice is make the people as dependent on you as possible. Chapter 10, how to measure the strength of a principality. In examining the character of any one of these principalities, we have to face the question, does the prince have enough power to be able to rely on his own resources in time of need, or does he need help from others? Let me be clear about the line I'm drawing. It is between the prince who has enough men or money to be able to raise a sufficient army or join battle against an attacker, and the prince who can't show himself against the enemy in the field and has to shelter behind the walls of his city waiting for help. Again, always Machiavelli talking about the king, the prince, the authority needs to have control of the violence. The prince, for Machiavelli, does many things, but his primary office is that of warlord. He is a warrior. He needs to be able to command on the field. He needs to be able to bring troops to battle. He needs to have the money and the ability to raise an army and to bring it to battle. And if you're not that, if you are some civilian ruler who does not have direct control of the government, then that means you are dependent on someone else. And that means that when the time comes, you're going to be sitting behind your walls, desperately hoping that whoever you're dependent on comes to your aid. That's why every single country in the world that is dependent on the United States for its military is not sovereign. They are by definition not sovereign. So yeah, that means basically all of Europe, not really sovereign, dependent on the United States to be the major leader of NATO. Now, Israel is an interesting scenario. Obviously, they need the United States. They cannot do the military operations they want to do alone. We're seeing that right now. We're living that right now. But they seem to dictate a lot more than this normal sovereign relationship would express, which makes us wonder what's going on here, right? Because under Machiavelli's definition, Israel should be entirely subordinate to the United States. That doesn't seem to be the case. So that means there must be something else going on. There has to be another path to power that Israel has taken that is not the normal sovereign understanding. Again, this is why people don't like it when you start studying power, but this is pretty obvious, right? We have the conditions by which a sovereign should rule. So if we see something breaking the pattern, we need to look for other answers. I've discussed in chapter 6 and will return in chapter 12 to 14. All I can say about this is to advise such princes to provision and fortify their cities and not to defend their rural areas. If a prince has fortified the city well and has managed his subjects' concerns in the way that I have described and will return to later, others will be very cautious about attacking him. Men are never enthusiastic about enterprises that they can see will be difficult and will be seen to be difficult to attack a ruler who is in his city and well fortified and isn't hated by his people. So fortify the city, have the supplies, have what you need, and make sure the people like you. And if that's the case, if you have the favor of the people, you have a well fortified city, and you have a well provisioned city, people are just very unlikely to attack you because it's going to be difficult. And people don't like doing what's difficult. They want easy targets. They want easy victories. When cities of Germany are absolutely independent, they have literal rural territory. They obey the emperor when it suits them and them too, and they aren't afraid of the emperor or any of his neighbors. That's because they are so well fortified that everyone thinks it would be tedious and difficult to take them. And they'll always have good moats and walls, enough artillery, public depots, and enough food, drink, and fuel to last a year. Also, to support the people without public expenditures or handouts, they have a stock of raw materials that will provide a year's worth in trades that are the city's lifeblood, and thus a year's wages of the workers in them. They also have respect for military exercises and have many rules to make sure that they are held. All right, so this is a really interesting paragraph, actually. There's a lot to pull out of here. So, if you're not aware, at this time we did not have a unified Germany, as you understand it. You have like this Holy Roman Empire, and the different princes have a large degree of control in these different areas. And there, so you have like mixtures of principalities and republics kind of all in here. And he says, look, ultimately, because these areas are so autonomous, because they have their own fortifications, because they tend to have well-defined cities, they have all of these different logistical concerns taken care of. People are just not going to go mess with them. It's just going to be too tedious, too difficult, too costly. And so even, when it comes to obeying the emperor, they kind of just do it when they want to. And again, that kind of goes against our idea. An emperor has to be powerful. An emperor has to have total control. An emperor would be authoritarian, right? Well, no, actually, not really. Because if these different areas have a high degree of autonomy, there's only so much the emperor can do, and it would be unwise for the emperor to test his authority against people who could legitimately reject it. And so he usually goes with a light hand. Again, there's just this misunderstanding of how monarchy used to work, how emperors and kings used to work. They did not have this constant tyrannical authority. In fact, they had to be very careful about how they expressed their authority when there were situations where those that they're expressing authority over could revolt. So you want to make sure that if you're going to force that authority down, the person can't ultimately resist it, because that's going to make you look weak. And so most emperors and kings did not exert the level of authority that they theoretically had, because they knew that if that authority was rejected by people who could reject it, then that would be a serious mistake. Also very interesting in here, he says that they don't just have the food and the drink and everything else that you think you'd need in a siege. They also have all the things you would need to work a trade for a year. That's really interesting, because the city is not agricultural. They're not farming, that kind of thing. That's why they need the food and the water and everything stored up. Their money, their lifeblood is really these guilds. It's these tradesmen. It's the crafts that can only occur in the city, right? That's where they really make their money in their economy. Basically, he's saying you need to be ready to do domestic manufacturing. Your sovereignty is based on domestic manufacturing. Can you continue to produce the things you need to produce? Can you continue to operate your economy domestically when you're sieged, when you couldn't otherwise trade with other people? If the answer is yes, then it's going to be far harder to drive you out of the city. We can translate this into the modern day. One of the reasons that our country is particularly vulnerable and has to maintain a global empire is we've offshored all of our manufacturing. So we can't maintain our sovereignty because we can't maintain our economy without those open shipping lanes. If America was somehow, embargoed, if we had a whole blockade around the United States tomorrow, we would have serious problems logistically because of the way we've structured our economy. Now, we're lucky in that the way that our country is positioned globally, we don't have to worry about that. But that's really important advice. Thus, a prince who has a strong city and hasn't made himself hated won't be attacked. Anyone who did attack him would be driven off, humiliated, because this world is so challengeable that it's almost impossible to keep an army idle besieging a city for a whole year. Someone may object. If the people have property outside the city and see it burnt, they won't remain patient, and long siege and self-interest will make them forget their prince. I reply, with a strong and energetic prince will overcome all such difficulties by giving his subjects hope that the trouble will soon be over, scaring them with tales of enemies' cruelty and moving nimbly to protect himself from those of his subjects who seem to him to be too bold. So here he's saying, okay, look, yeah, you can pull everyone in the city, you can be sieged by these people, but what if they go around burning everything in the country? All these people who've been pulled into the city from the country, they're going to look outside of their property burning, and they're going to want to leave. They're going to betray you so they can go defend that. And he says, no, all you need is a strong enough prince who's going to ensure the people that that eventually this hardship's going to be over and there'll be some kind of vengeance or some kind of restitution. And he tells them very directly, scare your people. Scare your people with the enemy tales of the enemy's cruelty. Make it clear to them that if they go out of the city, if they go out beyond your protection, they're going to get hurt. Again, maybe not the most moral advice, go scare your citizens, but a powerful trick, one we have seen before, one you are probably familiar with right now. If we don't take action right now, they're going to get us. They're weeks away from a bomb, not exactly a new, not exactly, we have to fight them over there. So we don't have to fight them over here. Not a new tactic. Also, as the enemy approaching the city, they will naturally burn and ruin the countryside. This will happen at a time when spirits of the people are still high and they are determined to resist. This should actually encourage the prince because a few days later, when the spirits have cooled, the damage is already done and the bad thing has already happened, and there is no remedy for them. So the people all will be all the more ready to support the prince because he seems to have under obligation to them now that their houses have been burnt and their possessions ruined by his defense. They will support him because he is obliged to them. Yes, because it's human nature to be bound to the benefits one gives as much as those one receives. All things considered, therefore, it won't be hard for a wise prince to keep the minds of his citizens steadfast through a siege as long as they have food and weaponry. So he says, don't worry about people who are watching the countryside burn, because that's going to happen at the beginning of the war, at the beginning of the battle, when people are still on your side, when it's still popular, when they're still passionate about the conflict. And he says, once that passion cools and people start, thinking a little more and worrying a little more, well, it's too late. The countryside's already burned. There's nothing for them to do about that. That moment has already passed. And now they're going to be dependent on you because they need you to get that retribution. They need you to get that payback for what happened here. And they also need you to defend them against the guys that are now there. So more or less, you don't have to worry about this because the bad stuff's going to happen while the people support you. And as soon as you start losing support, it's too late. The bad stuff's already happened. So there's nothing they can do about it. Plus, they're going to want vengeance. They're going to want restitution. Again, you don't have to think too hard to kind of consider how this might apply in our current day. Well, once the bad things happen, you already have the support. And once people withdraw, it's too late because now they need you to get vengeance for all the bad things that have happened. You let the problem occur and then you sell yourself as a solution to that problem. A classic political move we've seen, and now we know its origins, or at least one of its the people who laid out how that works. Chapter 11, Ecclesiastical Principalities. Up to here, I've been discussing, I'm nearly finished with the whole topic. All that is left for me to discuss are ecclesiastical principalities, church states. The difficulties that occur in relation to these concerns, what happens on the way to getting possession. Because once such a principality has been acquired, whether by virtue or fortune, it can be held onto without either. That's because church states are backed by ancient religious institutions that are so powerful and of such a character that princes can stay in power no matter how they behave and live. These are the only princes who have states that they don't defend, and subjects who they don't rule. And the states, although unguarded, are not taken from them. And the subjects don't mind not being ruled and don't want to alienate themselves and have no way of doing so. Those are the only principalities that are secure and happy, but they're upheld by divine powers to which the human mind can't reach. So I shan't say anything more about them. They are raised up and maintained by God, and it would be presumptuous and rash to discuss them. So he's saying basically here, look, if you got your rule from God, if people believe so thoroughly in the church that you have been given control over this area and that they will not transgress it, they will not take it because they would be defiling God's word, they would be at war with God himself. Well, congratulations, basically, because you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to defend the area. You don't even have to rule the people because ultimately you were given this by God and it can't be taken away from you. Anyone who crosses you is going to be crossing the church. They're going to be crossing God Almighty, and that is going to be beyond the pale for them. So if you are someone who has kind of ended up in this situation where you control an area and people believe it's because of divine right, because God has given it to you, and they would never, ever go in there and try to challenge your rule because that would be violating a religion they truly believe in, well, then don't worry because you're pretty secure. And he says basically, in fact, this is such a secure power and so beyond really the normal understanding of power that I don't even really discuss it anymore. But then he does a little bit, except for one matter. Someone may want to say, how does it come about that the church has so greatly increased its temporal power? Before the papacy of Alexander VI, the Italian rulers, not only of the great states, but every baron and lord, however minor, regarded the church's temporal power as almost negligible. But now a king of France trembles before it, and it has been able to drive him from Italy and ruin to the ruin of the Venetians. What happened? Remember, one of the through lines you see in Machiavelli as well is his frustration with the church having the level of political influence it does in Italy. Really, Machiavelli did not want the church to be dictating to the level it did when it comes to Italian politics. So he's going to hit on this and say, hey, if for most of history, the church has not been considered that powerful when it came to temporal matters, or I guess today in the modern world we'd call these secular matters. But all of a sudden, the Pope can now make kings, powerful kings, tremble. What happened? Though the answer is well known, it may be worthwhile for us to remind ourselves of. Before King Charles VIII of France moved into Italy, this country was dominated by the Pope, the Venetians, the King of Naples, the Dukes of Milan, and the Florentines. Each of these powers has two main concerns: that no foreign army should enter Italy, and that none other than the four should seize more territory. Those about whom there was the most anxiety were the popes and the Venetians. The Venetians could be held back only by the other three working together, and to keep down the popes, the others had to make use of the barons of Rome. There were split into two factions, the Orsini's and the colonists, and they were always on the brink of outright fighting. So there they were, weapons at the ready, under the eye of the Pope, and this kept the papacy weak and indecisive, the brevity of each individual papacy contributing to this. Popes have, on average, reigned about 10 years, and that's hardly enough for a pope to pull down one of the factions. And if, of course, for example, one pope came near to destroying the colonists, he was to be succeeded by one who was hostile to the Orsini's. That successor would pull the colonists up again, and that wouldn't have enough power to ruin the Orsini's. That's why Pope's temporal powers weren't given much respect in Italy. So he says basically there's this kind of tension, this dynamic, in a way, branches of government, right? The fact that every one of these different groups had to play each other's power off each other to kind of restrict the other one meant that no one could really consolidate control. Because if you tried to knock out one of these powers to bring more power to yourself, eventually there would be this pendulum effect and they'd come back and you wouldn't be able to control the results of that. And so everyone kind of was in this Nash equilibrium. Everyone's operating on the best strategy they can have at the moment. They're playing the best cards that they have on a regular basis, and this kind of maintained the situation. Then came Pope Alexander VI, who was more than any previous pope, showed that a pope could do what a pope could do with money and arms, using Duke Valentino, Caesar Borgia, and exploiting the opportunity provided by the French invasion of Italy. He did all the things that I mentioned in chapter 7 when discussing the Duke's actions. His aim was to build up the Duke, not the church, but his actions did make the church more powerful. And that increased power was the legacy that was left to the church after Alexander's death and the downfall of his son. After Alexander, there was Pope Julius II, who found the church strong. It had control of all of Romania, and the Roman barons and their factions had been wiped out by Alexander's severity. Julius also found a way for the church to accumulate money, a way that had never been followed before by Alexander VI. Julius didn't just follow the policies, he improved upon them. He planned to capture Bologna and to squelch the Venetians and to chase the French out of Italy. He succeeded in all of this, and what makes this especially credible is that he did it to strengthen the church and not to benefit any private person, as Alexander sought to benefit his son. He also kept the Orsini and the Colonia factions within the bounds in which he found them. And although a few of their leaders were poised to make trouble, two things held them back: the greatness of the church, with which Julius terrified them, and they're not having their own cardinals. When these factions have their cardinals, they don't remain quiet for long because cardinals take sides. both inside Rome and out of it, and barons are compelled to support them. In this way, the ambitions of the prelates generate disorders and tumults among the barons. For this reason, His Holiness Pope Leo X, formerly the Cardinal de' Medici, found the papacy in a very strong condition, and it is to be hoped that there were others made it, and it is to be hoped that there were others made it great through force. Sorry, strange sentence structure there. He will make it even greater and more venerated through his goodness and his countless other virtues. So he says, okay, this guy recognized the momentum that had been created by his previous pope, and he recognized what could be done with this money and this power. And because he wanted to aggrandize the power of the church and not just build up this power and then hand it off to his son in the way that Pope Alexander had, that meant that he was truly accruing it to this organization. It wasn't kind of like using the church and using the organization to then set up someone else's power. So there's a very different scenario. All right, now our big chapter here. The different kinds of armies, mercenaries, chapter 12. Now that I have given a detailed account of the kinds of principalities that I set out to discuss, and have paid some attention to the causes of their flourishing or failing, and have shown the methods by which many men have tried to acquire them and retain them, I turn to a less detailed account of how each kind of principality can be attacked and defended. I've spoken of how necessary it is for a prince to have firm foundations for his power. Otherwise, he will go to ruin. The chief foundation for all states, new states, as well as older composite ones, are good laws and good armies. Because a poorly armed state doesn't have good laws, and a well-armed state will have good laws. I can set the laws aside and address myself to the armies. The army which a prince defends his state with will either be his own, or mercenaries, or auxiliaries, soldiers belonging to a commander commanded by other princes, or some mixture of the above. Mercenaries and auxiliaries are useless and dangerous, and any ruler who lies on them to defend his state will be insecure and in peril, because they are disunited, ambitious, undisciplined, and disloyal, courageous when they are with their friends, cowardly in the presence of their enemies. They have no fear of God and don't keep their promises. All right, so lots there. He says, look, if you're going to be a prince, you got to have a firm foundation, and the foundation of your power is violence. It's the ability to do damage. You need a good army. Okay, so what kind of armies do we have? Well, you can have your own army. You have an army based on mercenaries, people you're paying, or you can have auxiliaries, which are forces that are on your side, but you don't control. They have their loyalty to someone else, usually another prince, another king, another army. Never use them. He says, never use mercenaries or auxiliaries, because they're not tied to you. They're not going to be ultimately loyal to you. So they're going to be disunited. They're going to be insecure. Your power is always going to be perilous. They're going to be undisciplined. They'll be disloyal because they're only there for pay, or because some other government is telling them to be there. They'll be courageous. They'll be like very boastful when it's just them hanging out in the field. But when it's time to actually do battle, they're going to be cowardly, because there's, again, no reason for them to keep their promises. They're not going to fear God, and they're not going to keep their promises because they're not loyal to you. Again, many, many, many applications of this. This is why George Washington told us to not make military alliances, prolonged military alliances, because you can't trust auxiliaries. You can't trust someone else's troops to do your job for you. This is, for instance, when I hear people say things like, we need to be in this long-term special relationship with Israel because they can give us intelligence. No, that's an auxiliary. That's not your force. You don't control it. And likewise for Israel, if America is your auxiliary and America decides to do something else, well, it's unreliable for you. They're not loyal to you. Ultimately, their interests should at least diverge from yours. So these are unwise. Again, we see this with so many international treaties, NATO, all this stuff. You're counting on other people's troops to do your work. The UN, peacekeeping forces, that kind of thing, always going to be cowardly, always going to be undisciplined, always going to be unreliable. With them as his army, the only way a prince can hold off his own ruin is by holding off any military attack. In peace, one is robbed by them, and in war, by the enemy. Why? Because they have no affection for you and no reason to go to battle except small wages you pay them. And those aren't enough to make them willing to die for you. So he's like, don't fool yourself. Any guy who's only fighting for pay is not loyal to you. Yeah, there might, mercenaries have certainly died on the battlefield. But if you're looking for that unbreakable strength, that unbreakable will, the guy who pushes forward and fights, the guy who gets the Medal of Honor, the guy who storms the machine gun nest or does the incredibly brave thing, they're only going to do that if they really believe in the cause, if they're really loyal to you. If they're just there for pay, they're not going to dive on grenades for you. What's the point of diving on the grenade for a guy who paid you a little bit of money? He's not going to pay you. You're not going to be able to spend the money when you're dead. The only thing that gives you that desire to sacrifice yourself is an existential connection, right? Something that is transcendent, that you say, I would rather die than betray this connection. I need it so much that it'd be worth dying for. Like, that's something you're not going to get from somebody you just sent a check to. They're ready enough to be your soldiers while they aren't at war with anyone. But when the war comes, they'll either desert you or run away on the battlefield. If it does, it shouldn't be hard to convince the reader of this, because Italy's downfall has been caused purely by the long period of reliance on mercenaries. For a while, they looked good and actually won some battles against some other mercenaries. But when the foreign armies show up, the mercenaries were revealed in their true colors. That's how it was possible for Charles VIII of France to seize Italy with chalk in hand. Savonarola, again, Italian is fun, told us that our sins were the cause of Italy's troubles, and he was right. But the trouble came not from the sins that we're thinking of, but the ones I have described. They were the sins of the princes. It is fitting that the princes have also suffered the penalty. So he says, look, you've made a mistake by relying on mercenaries. Yeah, mercenaries might go into the field and they might even beat another mercenary army. But when you go up against a real army, a king's army, an army that is fighting for their lord, their nobility, their country, their cause, their God, their truth, they are not going to be broken by some guys who are just getting pay. The guys who are getting paid are going to break before the guys who are serving their true king. That's going to just be a totally different thing. And he says, you really have to worry about this because we've seen Italy be destroyed by this. So if you don't know, at this time, again, Italy is not a unified force, right? As he described previously, it's this delicate balance of all these different other powers, different kings, different dukes, different oligarchies, all the church, they're all playing off each other. Italy is really more of a collection of city-states at this time. We don't have a unified Italy until Garibaldi. In fact, that was part of Machiavelli's point. By the end of The Prince, it becomes clear he wants Italy to unify. He wants to have that same kind of unified power, and he thinks Italy's going to continue to get run over. It's going to continue to get run over until they figure that out, until they fix this problem. Machiavelli knows this from experience because he had mercenary armies betray him repeatedly, and so he actually went out and built his own force. He made it his mission to kind of build that Republican force that he could draw on because he was so tired of having mercenaries betray him. I want to show more clearly how unsatisfactory mercenary armies are. If a given mercenary commander is virtuous, then you can't trust him because he will be busy pursuing power for himself, either by turning against you, his employer, or attacking people whom you don't want attacked. And if he isn't virtuous, his incompetence will work against you in the usual way. Someone might object, what you have said about mercenary commanders holds for anyone with soldiers under his command, whether mercenary or not. The implication of this is that it doesn't matter what kind of soldier a state army has. So he's saying here, look, if the mercenary captain is good at what he does, again, this is where he's using virtue and like virtuoso here. You are good at what you do. If he's good enough to conquer and lead on his own, he's not going to be happy just working for some other guy. If he's got the ambition and he's got the skill, he's not just going to sit around and do the work for you. He's going to try to secure his own power. So you can't expect him to ultimately be on your side. He's going to do things that aren't in your interest because he's powerful enough, he's good enough at what he does that ultimately he is going to be able to take that position. The implication of this is that it doesn't matter what kind of soldier a state's army has. I reply that it matters greatly, and that when armed force is to be used by a prince, when the prince ought to do what the prince, then the prince ought to go in person and put himself in command of the army. Again, always, first and foremost, Machiavelli believes the prince should be a warrior. And then when a republic goes to war, it has to send its citizens as commanders. When one is sent, he doesn't turn out satisfactorily, he should be recalled. And then the commander turns out to be very capable. There should be laws that forbid him to exceed his assigned authority. Experience has shown princes and republics with their own armies do extremely well, and the mercenaries doing nothing but harm. And it is harder for a citizen to seize control of a republic than it is for his own for republic that has its own army, than to do this with a republic that relies on foreign troops. All right, so if you're a prince, you should personally lead your troops. Don't give command to mercenaries, to other countries and their leaders. You should lead them. If you're a republic, you should send your citizens as commanders. If you have a bad one, bring them back and get a new one out there. If you have a good one, make sure there are laws that make it difficult for that guy to take power. It says it's much more difficult for a skilled general to take power in a republic if because he's constrained by the laws. However, if you have mercenaries, if you're using other people's troops, that could be a different story. Examples of the advantages of a republic having its own army: Rome and Sparta stood for many ages armed and independent. The Swiss today are completely armed and entirely independent. Examples of the troubles of republics get into when they rely on mercenaries. In ancient times, the Carthaginians were attacked by their mercenary soldiers after the first war with the Romans, although the mercenaries were commanded by Carthaginian citizens. The Thebans, after the death of their general, Epaminondas, that's a fun one, gave Philip of Macedon the command of their army, and after victory, he took away their liberty. When Duke Filippo died, and the Milanese engaged Francisco Sforza to lead their troops against the Venetians, he defeated the Venetians at Carvoghi, and then allied himself with the Crush, and then here we go, lost it for a second, and then allied himself with them to crush his employers, the Milanese. His father, having been engaged as an army commander by Queen Johann of Naples, left her unprotected, so that to save her kingdom, she had to appeal to the King of Aragon for help. It may be objected there are striking counterexamples to your thesis about the dangers of hiring mercenaries. The Venetians and Florentines extended their dominions by the use of mercenaries, and their commanders didn't make themselves princes, but defended their employers. I reply that in this matter the Florentines were favored by chance. The virtuoso commanders might have been threats. Some weren't victorious, some were met with opposition, and others turned their ambitions elsewhere. One who wasn't victorious was John Hawkwood, and since he didn't conquer, his loyalty can't be proven. But everyone will agree that if he had conquered, the Florentines would have been at his mercy. Sforza had Braccios' people always against him, so the two mercenary leaders kept one another in check. Sforza turned his ambition to Lombardy. Bracciano went against the church and the kingdom of Naples. But let us look at what happened quite recently. The Florentines appointed as their army commander Paolo Vitelli, an extremely shrewd man who, from being an ordinary citizen, had risen to great prominence. There's no denying that this man was captured. There's no denying that if this man had captured Pisa on their behalf, the Florentines would have had to return his services because of their enemies. Because if their enemies hired him as a commander, they, the Florentines, would be lost. And if they keep him, they would have to obey him, i.e., there would be nothing to stop him from installing himself as prince. So again, Machiavelli is saying, look, if a mercenary happens to win and actually serves you and actually defends the people they're supposed to, you got lucky. You got really lucky because ultimately you're at the mercy of the guy with the sword. At the end of the day, the guy with the sword, the guy with the army makes the rules. And so if you're lucky enough to use another person's sword and secure victory and they don't turn on you, then, pray to God, thank God, because ultimately you got incredibly lucky. The far more likely thing is that once you're victorious, if the mercenary captain can, or if the foreign leader who you were using his arms can, they're going to turn on you. They're going to try to make themselves more powerful. As for the Venetians, if we look at their achievements, we see that they fought confidently and gloriously so long as they made war using their own men, with nobles and armed commoners fighting valiantly. That was in sea battles. When they began to fight on land, they forsook their virtue and followed the Italian custom of hiring mercenaries. In the early stages of their expansion on land, they had little to fear from their mercenary commanders because they didn't have much territory for their commanders to eye greedily, and because of their great reputation, which will have scared off many mercenaries who wanted to go up against them. But when their domain expanded, as it did under Carmangula, they got a taste of the trouble that mercenaries can bring. They saw that a virtuoso soldier they beat the Duke of Milan under his leadership. But they also saw that he was becoming lukewarm about the war against Milan and were afraid that he wouldn't bring them any more victories because he no longer had victory in mind. So they didn't want to keep him on their payroll, but they couldn't, or they wouldn't, or couldn't just dismiss him because that would threaten them with the loss of territory they had just gained. The threat coming from an enemy whose army was commanded by the able Carmigula. To keep themselves safe, therefore, the only option was to kill him. They recalled him to Venice and for consultation, and then accused him of treason and tried to behead him. After him, they had several mercenary commanders. Machiavelli names 3 of them, who didn't create a fear of their winning victory, and then getting out of hand because they usually lost, as happens at the Battle of Valia. Where in one battle they lost everything they were acquired through 8 centuries of effort. The use of mercenaries brings a widely spaced series of slow, minor victories and a rapid rattle of large defeats. These examples concern Italy, which have been ruled by many years by mercenaries, and I want to discuss more fully the problem that they raise because a grasp of its origins and growth will contribute to finding a solution. So he says, look, you can have this really virtuoso, this really good general. He's a mercenary general. He's out in the field, but you feel like maybe he's not going to get the job done. He's ultimately losing that drive to get the final battle done. You try to recall him, but you can't recall him because he might betray you. You're pulling him out of the situation. He's going to lose authority. He's going to lose the money. All of the incentives for him is ultimately to turn on you. So they had to bring this guy back and lie to him and try to kill him to replace him, right? And then once you do that, who knows if you're going to lose all the territory that this guy has gained for you? Because once again, you don't control the army. You don't control the swords. The essential background facts are that in the recent times, the empire has been repudiated in Italy. The Pope has acquired more temporal power, and Italy has been divided up into states. Many of the great cities took up arms against their nobles, who had ruled oppressively with the emperor's support. The church sided with the rebels as a way of increasing its temporal power, and many other towns, private citizens became princes. The upshot of this was that Italy fell partly into the hands of the church and the republics. The church consisted of priests and the republics of civilians, and both started to hire foreigners to do their fighting. The first successful mercenary commander was Albergo de Cogno of Romagna, and it was through learning about him that Braccio and Sforza and others were in their time the arbiters of Italy. After these came all the other mercenary commanders down to the present time. The result of their virtue has been that Italy has been overrun by Charles of France, robbed by Louis of France, ravaged by Ferdinand of Spain, and insulted by the Swiss. Let's see. Jump around a bit. The mercenary commanders also did everything they could to lessen fatigue and danger to themselves and their soldiers. In battle, they don't kill, but merely took prisoners whom they freed without ever demanding ransom. All of these were permitted by the military rules, which they devised, and as I've said, to enable them to escape danger and hard work. And so they have brought Italy to slavery and humiliation. So as you can see here, Machiavelli once again lands in the same place. Mercenaries are bad. Mercenaries are going to betray you. Mercenaries are not going to fight on your side when the going gets tough. If they are victorious, they're going to want to take over. Only if you're very lucky would a mercenary, basically have your entire city at his own mercy and then just leave because you gave him money. Because the funny thing about swords is swords can always get you money, but money can't always get you swords. And so a guy who has all of your money basically at his disposal because he has all the swords, is he really going to go out and just kind of continue to fight or just walk away when he could just have all the money to himself? He has no loyalty to you. Why would he do that? And this is why Italy was in such a mess at the time of Machiavelli, because these different republics, these different peoples, they had gotten used to hiring mercenaries rather than sending their own people in the field. The church and its papal states, they're not going to usually have their armies. They're going to hire mercenaries. The priests aren't going to go to battle. The republics fell out of favor with kind of raising up their own militias and going to war that way. They wanted to hire other people to do their work for them. And Machiavelli is just providing this laundry list of ways in which the mercenaries are ultimately going to betray you. And this is going to be a huge mistake. All right, guys. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap that one up here. We're over an hour already, but I appreciate you coming by and enjoying these streams. I really like going over the political theory with you. I know we got the day-to-day news, and I'm sure we'll jump back into that. I've actually got a really interesting interview coming on Friday with Dr. Ian McGilchrist, which I think you guys will enjoy quite a bit. I pre-recorded it, so I think it's already a good one. I think you're going to enjoy it when I play it here on Friday. But I really am glad that you guys are enjoying the series. I've gotten several encouraging emails and things saying, "Hey, man, I appreciate this. I know the day-to-day political stuff is more popular, but really glad that somebody is taking the time to go through this." So I really appreciate you guys and your encouragement. If you want to watch all of these, if you want to get the context for this chapter, you're like, "Oh, I didn't see the previous ones. I want to eventually listen to all the prints with the commentary." Then you can go to the playlist that's on my YouTube, and it'll, under Machiavelli, eventually have all the episodes. We're most of the way through the prints at this point, but it'll have everything once the series is done. Of course, you need to subscribe on YouTube, click the bell and notifications so you know when we go live and we're doing these shows. And if you want to get these broadcasts as podcasts, you need to subscribe to Your MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. When you do, leave a rating or review. It really helps with the algorithm magic. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And as always, I will talk to you next time.